Abortion is not a women's issue. Hey everyone, it's Kristan Hawkins. Welcome to this new episode of the Explicitly Pro-Life podcast.
Hi, I'm Autumn Higashi, and this is my new show, Unapologetic, powered by Students for Life. It's 2022. We don't have time to be scared of being publicly pro-life because we have bigger things to focus on, like saving lives. But I know it can be hard. The moment you open your mouth, you are bombarded with pro-choice keyboard warriors attacking your every word. And it can be intimidating unless you know exactly how to defend your position. Truth fears no investigation. There's an answer to every question, a solution to every situation, and a way to care for women and children. It doesn't have to be one or the other. So, consider me your new pro-life best friend. We all know pro-abortion media is shoved in our face daily. Facebook, TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, you name it. I want you to be able to understand how to break down their arguments and shine truth and light on this culture of death. I want you to not only know why you believe what you believe, but how to defend it with truth and love. Because we are the pro-life generation, and we are unapologetic.
Abortion is a human issue. It kills human children. It ruins women's lives. It tears apart families, and it makes a mockery of manhood and fatherhood. However, in an attempt to stop pro-lifers from talking about abortion advocates often claim that abortion is a women's issue and insist that only pro-choice women can voice an opinion. And if you're a pro-life man, forget about it. This is ironic since these are the very same people who refuse to define what a woman is. Yet they claim abortion is a woman's issue. Just let that sink in for a second. So today we're going to hear the perspective of someone who has been deeply impacted by abortion himself. He's a voice for all those who've been affected by abortion, women, men, and especially the children. And he argues that all humans, especially those in the church, need to speak up for the innocent. I'm honored to bring on David Williams today and the guest on the show. He serves as a men's chapter leader with Save One, an international ministry that helps men, women, and families recover after abortion. He's a proud member of Men and Abortion Network, and partners with pregnancy care centers and pro-life organizations as a speaker with ambassador speakers. He's a frequent guest on numerous radio shows and a monthly guest contributor on Moody Radio. He's also contributed to a couple of books. One of them is called Tears of a Fisherman. David's story was recognized recently at Sea Life 21 that focused on a family hosted. He is from the university, well, he graduated from the University of Pittsburgh. He and his wife and his 6 children live in Orlando. David, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, you're welcome, Kristan. Thank you so much for having me on. It's a blessing to be here.
It's an honor to have you on today. This is an issue that we know really doesn't get a lot of media play or airtime. Can you kind of share with us your personal experience with abortion and how it's impacted you over the years?
Yeah, when I was a 19-year-old college student, my very first girlfriend, first person I ever had sex with, got pregnant. And I was at a place where I was a first generation college student, didn't feel like I could be a dad, didn't know what it meant to be a dad or a husband. And so in my mind, I thought that there were only, 2 options. One, that we'd have the baby, and I didn't think we were ready for that. And 2, we would have an abortion. And I actually went with that reasoning to my girlfriend and convinced her, based on where we are as first generation college students who need to get a degree to figure out our life, like this would actually be an impediment to us. And so with that, I kind of convinced her that that was what we should do. And I'm not sure she was fully convinced, Kristan, because from that day until maybe the next 6-8 weeks later, there was a question she asked me every day. And she would ask me, David, do you think that this is the right thing to do? And early on, my answer came back yes, and it came back very quickly. But over time, my answer came back slower, and I began to think about it. But there was no one telling me that there was something different or a different option or the value of the child's life that was being knit together by God in my girlfriend's womb, or even the value of my own life or her life. And so even though there was some doubt that was creeping in, I still thought at the end of the day, this is best for us. And when she actually had the abortion, I was man enough, Kristan, to tell her that this is what we should do. But I wasn't man enough to get on a plane. We were in between summer. It was summer between our sophomore year of college. She was living in one city. I was living in another. I did not travel there to be with her. But yet I was man enough to say, this is what we should do. And on that day, she asked that very same question. And I could hear it in her voice that she was almost longing for me as a man to step up and to say something different. And yet, slower than ever, I came back with the same answer. Her mother drove her to the abortion clinic, and she went. And when we talked later on that evening, she was so traumatized. She was traumatized by what had happened to her. Here was a woman that I said I loved, and I realized in that moment I didn't protect her. I didn't know God. I wasn't a follower of Jesus Christ as I am now. But even then, I knew, Kristan, that what we had done was I literally made a decision for my own life, my own dreams, my own plans, and I put that ahead of the life of my child. And I knew that at that moment, what I had done. And there was a lot of grief. There was guilt. There was shame. I became very depressed. A lot of anger that would erupt out of me. There was the loss of our relationship, which brought a lot of pain. On top of that, I started drinking more. I already drank before this, but it was almost drinking to have fun, to be the life of the party. Afterwards, there was a sense of drinking to try to drown my sorrows. I mentioned that she was the first young lady that I had ever been with sexually. Afterwards, I became very promiscuous, and it was almost like I was using women to try to medicate my pain. And I had this unhealthy desire to get my college education because, in one sense, my college education was the idol upon which I sacrificed my child. And it was almost like I have to get this to prove that I'm successful. And there was, just a lot of pain, a lot of guilt. And that continued for years. It went into other relationships. Another unplanned pregnancy 3 years later when I graduated from college. And because I didn't want to do what I did at 19, because it didn't solve anything, abortion didn't fix anything, it didn't make my life better. In fact, it made it worse in many regards. And so I decided that, we're going to have the baby. And I decided I was going to marry this young woman. But yet I thought in some sense, Kristan, that by me doing something different, it would make my life different. And it did, in the sense of the fact that I have a 28-year-old son who I do have a relationship with, but there's been a lot of pain and a lot of hurt along the way. And so, those things have dealt with me. That was 19. I'm a 50-year-old man. And some of those things, even to this day, have impacted me. God in the midst has intersected my life. I've come to know him. I've come to know the source of life. I've come to know his forgiveness, his grace, his healing. But there were some things that even impacted my marriage. I remarried at 30. So a few years after I got divorced from my first wife. And I've been married for 20 years. We have 6 kids, as you've mentioned. But there were some things that I was deeply impacted by, and I believe were a result of the abortion. It was hard for me to bond with my kids. There was a lot of anger towards my wife. I was very depressed. I would find it hard to make decisions when we were faced with big decisions. And even now, knowing God and being in ministry, there was almost this sense of I got to prove myself and be successful. And so there's been a lot of things that have happened because of that. And at the same time, I have come to know in better measure the forgiveness and grace and healing of God. But that decision 31 years ago, still impacts me today as a man. And the ripple effects, I've seen it in my family in negative ways.
When did you, was there like a moment of realization where you figured out, wow, a lot of these issues that I'm experiencing or that my family's suffering from are a result of the abortion that my girlfriend had?
Kristan, it took me a long time to come to that place. So the abortion was at 19. At 26 years of age, I came into a relationship with God through his son, Jesus Christ. So I began to know forgiveness. But it wasn't until I was 40 years old that I began to recognize how deeply abortion impacted me. And I never shied away from any of my stories. So when I would share with people my story, I would share about the abortion. And so because of that, I was asked to speak at a pregnancy center as a man who had been a part of abortion, but who knows the forgiveness of God. So I was asked to speak in that manner. And Kristan, even though I knew that God had forgiven me of the abortion, I never really thought about it much at all until that day I was asked to speak. And it brought home to me, I began to really have to sit in what I had done. The fact that I was complicit in the murder of my first daughter. I had to sit in that. I began to sit in it for the first time. And I think in some regards, I began to realize how heinous and how wicked and how evil an act that was. And yet I think God was using it to allow me to see that there was even forgiveness and grace that was even deeper than what I was feeling in the guilt. But speaking on that night, I think God brought it home to me that this has affected me in some ways. And there just happened to be a guy there, and you might know him, Kristan, Brad Mattis, who's with Life Issues Institute. So Brad actually is at this banquet, and Brad comes up to me after I speak and gives me his card and says, "We need to talk." I call Brad. And he said, like, David, I think that God's going to use you in some amazing ways to be a voice for preborn children in spite of your story. He's going to use you to minister grace to men and women who find themselves in crisis due to an unplanned pregnancy. I believe he'll use you to minister to even those who have been broken by abortion, that they can know that there's healing and forgiveness and grace. But then the second thing he says to me, he says, I have a question for you. And I said, "What's the question, Brad?" He goes, "How have you allowed Jesus to heal the wound of abortion in your heart?" And Kristan, when he said that to me, I actually was thinking like, man, I have known Jesus for about 15 years. The abortion was 20 something years ago. Of course, Jesus has healed me of the wound of abortion. But I didn't say that to Brad. I said, I never have invited him I've never asked him to really, bring healing to me from this. So he sends me a book titled Fatherhood Aborted. And he asked me if I would be willing to go through an abortion recovery Bible study at a pregnancy center. So when he sends this book, Fatherhood Aborted, there were things in my life, the anger, the depression, hard to bond with my wife, hard to bond with my kids. I began to, it was almost like the Holy Spirit began to pull the curtain back, and I began to see that these things were correlated and connected to this abortion experience that I really didn't give much thought to. And as I began to go through this Bible study, there were just measures of healing and grace and forgiveness that God began to just really shower upon me. But it really took a man asking me a very pointed question and pointing me to some resources that showed me of the effect of abortion in men's lives, that really opened my eyes to the reality of how this was affecting my life, my marriage, my family, and even my ministry.
Thank God for Brad. He's a wonderful, courageous pro-life warrior I've been honored to know for a number of years. Have you spoken with your daughter's mother?
I haven't. And that's been something where, I've prayed that, God, if that is something that you want, that you will bring that together. I haven't spoken to her, but I have prayed for her a lot. Yeah. And it's almost one of those things, Kristan, where we haven't been in contact since, it's just a few years probably after the abortion. And, sometimes in my mind, I think like, should I find her? Should I go to her? Should I, ask her for forgiveness? Should I tell her the thing that I did was so wrong and I'm so sorry for, not standing up for our child and not protecting her? And I've had those thoughts. But then it's almost a thing like, I don't know where she's at in her life. And if I just show up out of the blue, I don't know if she's married. I don't know what's going on in her life. I don't know the impact that would have on her. But I do at some point wish that I would have that opportunity to actually be a man where I can say to her, like, I wasn't a man then. And there's a lot of pain you've experienced in your life because of the fact that I kind of went along with the narrative of our culture, right? They say it's a woman's choice. It's, it's a woman's right. And
Mm-hmm.
yet I was the father of a preborn child. And so, I had a right, a God-given instinct that God put in me to protect that child, to provide for that child. And I allowed the narrative of our culture to silence me in that moment. And because I was silenced, there's, the 31-year-old woman who could be here living out great potential and serving her purposes on earth, a woman who wouldn't have had to go through the trauma she went through, or even me and my family, some of the pain that we've gone through, if I would have stood up and been a man and not listened to the lie of the culture and sought out even another voice during that time, instead of thinking the way that I was thinking.
Yeah, I was just, when you were recounting your story and the trauma you endured from that abortion, I just couldn't help but pray for your daughter's mother because of the pain. We know she's likely suffered. And I think it just underscores the impact that abortion makes, the shock waves that abortion sends throughout our families and throughout our country. Where it's not just one girl going into an abortion facility. There's a dad, there's a whole family, there's a whole legacy, a whole part of the family tree that will never grow. And it's just, I think it's devastating if you start getting down that rabbit hole and thinking about all of these long-term effects of abortion. Men are often told, especially in the pro-life movement, that they cannot talk about abortion. If they are pro-life, there is absolutely no tolerance for them, especially on college campuses, in the media, out in the community and events. Men are treated as if this issue has nothing to do with them at all. They are simply the donor of the sperm. That is it. Even though we know it takes a man, it takes a male. I guess I don't know if I use the word man for some of these boys, but it takes a male to help create a new human being, and half of all of the children that are being aborted are also male. Why do you make it a point not just to speak out about abortion, but to also in your ministry urge other men to join you and to do the same?
Because, in some regards, we have been called to lead. I have a friend, Kristan, who years ago, he was a music minister at a church, and he went to go rehearse with his team, and they couldn't rehearse because there was such a great stench. And it was so bad they couldn't do anything. So he ends up leaving from the building. He walks outside and he realizes what the stench is. He sees this sewer. The manhole cover is off of the sewer. And this smoke is just rising up in the street, and it's causing the whole street to stink. And at that moment, he said he felt like God spoke to him and said this: that's what's wrong with our world today. Men are out of place. And because men are out of place, the stench in our world is so great. And I believe that when it comes to abortion, men are out of place. And this stench of abortion is just being allowed to grow and to fester more and more. And as men, we need to realize that, like you said, we're not, when there's an unplanned pregnancy, we're not a sperm donor. We are the father of a preborn child. We have a responsibility. If we listen to culture, it allows us to shirk our responsibility. And it puts all the weight on a woman that she was never meant to carry on her own. That guys don't even feel like they're culpable, they're responsible, and yet they are. And if you were man enough to lie down with her and to actually be a part of this procreation process that brings life, then we ought to be man enough to stand up and to defend life, beginning with our own children. And because we've bought the lie, we've allowed our children to be slaughtered, in numbers that should not be. We've allowed women, as you mentioned, even with my daughter's mom, it's like she's experienced trauma that I know nothing about, because of the fact that we're weak, it's kind of like weak spined and we're not standing up being who we are. And so, men need to stand up and men need to be that. And I take it even further. Like, I don't think I began to understand what it meant to be a man until I understood the one who created me to be a man, until I came into a relationship with God. It's like, even when my first wife, when I made a decision to choose life for my child, but it wasn't the fact that I all of a sudden became I wouldn't even say I became pro-life. It was almost like I was atoning for what I did before. I'm not going to do that again. But yet I was continuing to be in activities that could have led to other women being pregnant. I mean, I was committing adultery with my wife. I was out sleeping with other women. So I was actually putting women in places where they may have been, had an unplanned pregnancy. And I think I became a man when Jesus Christ changed my life. When Jesus Christ began to show me the purpose for my life, the purpose for marriage, the purpose for sex, the fact that babies in the womb are not blobs of tissue, but they are created in his image, and they are to be protected regardless of how young or small they are or what they can do, just because of the fact that they have intrinsic value that's been given to them by God. And so, my message is for men to step up, to be men, but ultimately, we can't step up and be the men that God's called us to be if we're not submitting to this God who creates these children in his image and likeness. But we're called to honor him even above that. And when we honor him, we want to defend and protect and uphold the very things that are on his heart. And that's having sex with one woman in the context of marriage, being fathers to our children that God is blessed us to be able to have. So that's a lot of my heart. And I think a lot of it comes because of just God's grace and God's forgiveness to me. Because when I think of what we're talking about, Kristan, I mean, it was just a horrible thing that I participated in. And the only reason I can talk to you today is because God is so amazing, and his grace is so amazing as well.
So I'm going to go off script of the question I didn't tell you in advance. So at Students for Life, we conduct research every year with our Dimitri Institute for Pro-Life Advancement. And it took us about 2.5 years, and we did a research study, a couple $100,000 research study on quantitative and qualitative analysis of the mushy middle or movable middle women in our country. Those, 18 to 34, most targeted by the abortion industry, how they feel about abortion, they feel about the pro-life movement. And it informed us greatly as the viewpoints. And we are actually in the midst, we are just getting ready to finish up our men's study, our movable mushy men's study. And some of the things that you've been saying have been interesting because we have been, so based on the study research, we have been testing out various kind of commercial language. And so our film crew has created basically like 4 commercials, and we're getting ready to kind of finish those up, and then we're going to do a final test to see which one wins. But it was interesting that we found that when I spoke to pro-lifers about the messaging to really move the needle when talking with men, the messaging was tell men to be men, to step up. But when we tested it with this generation of men, we didn't see the needle move that much. And I think it's very telling that, I think it kind of shows the damage that the Gen X mothers really have done upon the millennial and now the older Gen Zs, where the men are like expected not to have a say, and that they've been told by their mothers that they don't have a say. What's your best messaging for when you speak to younger men about why they need to step up here? Because you're right. Like when your girlfriend kept asking you that question, my book I wrote years and years ago, and it was Courageous. And I had interviewed myself and one of our team members. We had interviewed a bunch of students who had been involved in an abortion. Either they had helped save a child from abortion, they had chosen abortion, they had contemplated abortion, chose life. The one thing that was consistent in all of those interviews we conducted was the young women who had found somebody in their life to tell them don't do it didn't choose abortion. And they had all asked multiple people what they should do. And the ones who ended up choosing abortion never found one person to say, you don't have to do it. And I think that's very powerful because it doesn't mean you have to have all the answers right away or the solution to the other external crises that are going on in her life. It's just that she's looking for someone to, empower that feeling she already has that maybe I shouldn't end the life of my child. But I guess, what is your best recommendation when you're talking to young men, what they can say to other young men to this is something that will get men thinking and will kind of start that hopefully conversion process in their heart.
Yeah, it's something actually that that Brad kind of has shared with me, and I think he shared it with other men. I think there's some things that God has instinctively put in us as men, and whenever there is an abortion decision that's made, it actually kind of decimates those things. So he gives the 5 P's, and maybe you've heard them. So men are made to procreate, to provide, to protect, to have pleasure, and to perform. So think about when an abortion decision happens for a man. He was involved in the procreation process and it becomes a tragic fail. He's instinctively wants to provide and protect, and whether he was a part of the decision or not, when he finds out about it, he wasn't able to do either. That active sex that maybe was something that was pleasurable comes to bring great pain to his life, and his performance is like it led to death. And so there is something that instinctively we have as men, that when we go along with that lie that's been perpetuated to us, it actually strips away from us. It actually makes us less and less of a man, and we can't really function the way that we have been called to function. And I think a lot of times men don't think, because of the fact it's been packaged as a woman's issue. So men aren't talked about in the front end. We're not fathers of preborn children. Men aren't thought about in the back end. So nobody thinks about the fact that when there's an abortion, we do think that there's meant for people that know there's a baby that's killed. Some people will say, yeah, the woman experienced pain, she experiences trauma, but nobody thinks about the man and how many men, the ripple effect that it is affecting them for the rest of their life in relationships with women, in the way that they relate on their jobs, if they have future kids. It's like this decision is something that will impact you for the rest of your life. And in order to be strengthened as a man, it's almost like at this moment where you're presented with this decision in this hard place, that you can do something courageous and you can stand up and be the man that God has called you to be. And in that's going to even help later on along the line. And if not, it just continues to strip that manhood away from men. But I think you're right, Kristan. Like, there's a generation, because of the dynamics in families, where there's not a lot of dads in the home. And they've grown up in a generation where they've been told it's a woman's right to choice. A lot are raised by women. It almost makes it easier for them to kind of just go along. And they think that by doing that, I'm being supportive and I'm being a man. But we actually are not. And God is calling us in this hour to lead, and he wants men to rise up. He wants us to lead. It shouldn't be that women are just at the forefront. We should be at the forefront, speaking up for our, preborn children, and speaking up for women, and even speaking up for our own lives and the value that they have, before God.
Amen, brother. All right, last hard question, and then I will let you go. This is a hard one, though, so I hope you're prepared, David. I love interviewing guests for Explicitly Pro-Life, because I just get to take notes. I get to ask hard questions, and then I take notes, and then I get to learn. So it's actually very informative for me. The Christian church. The church is, by and large, I would say, silent on abortion. I think the Catholic Church has been very outspoken. In recent years, it's gotten kind of muddied with some of the bishops or cardinals. But I think, we've been very lucky and blessed, at the National Pro-Life March, for example, we have tens of thousands of Catholic pro-life youth. But I think by and large, the broader Christian church, Catholic and non-Catholic, is pretty quiet on abortion. What is holding back, in your view, church leaders speaking about abortion? And then the second part of the question is, how can we, as members of our church, as congregants, turn the tide towards getting our pastors, our priests, to vocally oppose abortion within our church community? Solve that problem for me, and I'll let you go, David.
I think, there's probably a lot of layers to that, Kristan, but one, I think we have allowed politics to kind of co-opt it. And it's a God issue at the very core of it. Like, this is a God issue. And the reason that we care is because there's a God who has created children in his image and in his likeness. And God has called the church first and foremost to be those that are, I think we have two ministries. We have one of justice and we have one of mercy, that we are to, we are to rescue the innocent. We are to, be there for the needy and the helpless. We are to be a voice for those who do not have a voice, like God has called that. And so wherever we see injustice anywhere or inhumanity, like we have a call from the God who has created human beings in his image to be there speaking up for life. So we should be at the forefront when it comes to speaking up for the human lives that God is knitting together in the womb. And then the second part of that is we have a ministry of mercy. We're to minister to those who find themselves in hard situations, many times, often because they're not following God and they're giving into their, their own selfish and sinful desires, and they find themselves in places. Yet we're to minister to them. We're to show them grace and forgiveness, and even those that have been broken by abortion. We're to let them know that there is a God. Yet God hates the shedding of innocent blood, but God sent his son into the world to shed his innocent blood to bring forgiveness and healing and hope. And I think one of the things, even in the church, and I find this a lot, Kristan, as I share my story, is that the church has a lot of has a lot of it in the church. So there are, 63 million abortions, 1 out of 4 women, 1 out of 4 men. Many of them are in our church. And the church hasn't been a place of healing and grace for those who've been impacted by it. So I think the enemy has silenced so many because it's a part of your story. How in the world could you ever dare to say something to somebody else when you yourself have been a part of an abortion? But if we really truly understood the grace of God and his forgiveness, we could be the ones who actually go forth and to let them know that this lie that they're telling you, that you go and you have an abortion, your life's going to be great. No, we know the other side of the story. We know the hurt. We know the pain. We know the ripple effect of it. But we also know the forgiveness that can come. And I think because so many have been hurt by it, even in leadership, and they really haven't done what Brad invited me to do, to invite Jesus to really heal that. So there's almost been this thing where you got people that are in church who feel like they can't say anything because who am I? Because of what I've done. And you got other people out and it's their way of making penance, and so they might do it, but they do it in a way that oftentimes can be almost condemning, when in a sense that they have received the forgiveness of God for something they've done. I think there's a lot of healing in the church. Even currently, 1 out of 4 women that are actively having abortions say they go to church once a month, and men, almost the same, or 40% of women, not 1 out of 4, 40% of women, and about 50% of men that their, girlfriends or partners or wives are having abortion currently are active in church. And so this is something that is impacting the church, and the church needs to be a part of it. I think, even before we get to the abortion issue, we're often silent on other things. We're silent on God's view of marriage. We're silent on God's view of sex. And so people get, pregnant. I had a young leader come to me in a church who had actually been booted from a church because it was found out that he and his girlfriend had an abortion, but they were sexually active. Nobody knew about it. He's leading in the church. She gets pregnant. And in order to cover up the fact that she's pregnant, they decide to get an abortion. And so sadly, within the church, because we're not open about it, we're not talking about it, people are doing it in the church, and it's just causing the ripple effect of it to grow. And so instead of us being out in the forefront, ministering to people who desperately need it, we're quiet in the pews. It's almost like the story of David and Goliath. Goliath is that giant of abortion who's been shouting, and we as the church are cowering. And God is longing for some Davids to come to see that he's much bigger, that he's a healer, he's a provider, he's a protector. He is one who has ordained life, and we can go in his name, and we can fight for those unborn lives, and we can minister healing to those even that are a part of our ranks that have been, hurt and devastated by abortion. So I think there needs to be, more abortion healing. I think the Catholic Church has done a great job of it. And they were in the forefront, Rachel's Vineyard and other things. And now there's other ones that are beginning to grow. But I find it even in my ministry, there's a lot of resistance. There's a lot of resistance. It could be the fact that the pastor's wife had an abortion. She didn't want anybody to know. The pastor himself had one. He was involved in an abortion. And so, yeah, as the church, we need to just get open and honest and allow the Lord to bring healing to us so that we really can be his voice. We really can be his hands and his feet in this world, because it is needed in this hour.
Amen. I couldn't agree with you more. We have a program, Students for Life, abortion campaign for abortion-free cities, where we're signing up churches to partner with us in about 24 different cities across the country. And the whole goal of the campaign is to reach those, most targeted by the abortion industry, change their minds on abortion, connect women in crisis to the pregnancy centers, maternity homes, whoever they need support from in the community to choose life, and then also to activate those who should be with us to join us in this fight. And I have to tell you, David, I was looking over kind of our first year and a half, looking through, we launched our post-Roe plan before Roe fell, not to brag or anything, but, and I've been looking through the data and the analytics from the past year and a half of our program, what's worked well, where did we spend money that could have been, better utilized somewhere else. And I have to tell you, the church partnerships is the hardest metric, the hardest goal for our team members to reach. And I would encourage you, if you are a member of a church, you want to get active, you want to force or, use some good old Christian guilt to get your pastor or your priest to talk about abortion, you can go to abortionfreecities.org/church. We have a whole church toolkit with sample sermons and ways you can get involved, because this is a major problem that, this should be the easiest part of our work. I mean, I can recruit people to go door knock in neighborhoods surrounding abortion facilities, not usually great neighborhoods, with only the promise of maybe a Chick-fil-A lunch, maybe a Chipotle burrito if I'm feeling real sassy. That's easier to do. Get people to go door to door, talk to neighbors about abortion, than to get a church to sign up to say, yeah, we'll talk about abortion once a year. Yeah, we'll put up flyers for Standing With You and other nonviolent resources. It's completely sad. David, thank you so much for all that you're doing, your ministry. I was certainly empowered by your words today. I felt like I got a little sermon, so that was a fun pick me up for the middle of my day. Where can folks go to learn more about what you're doing and follow you and your ministries?
Yeah, I have a website, davidwilliamsspeaks.com. They can follow me on Facebook at David Williams Speaks. And then I have a YouTube channel, which is also David Williams Speaks.
Awesome. Well, thanks, David, for coming on. That should be your last name, David Williams Speaks. We'll speak Williams your middle name. Thanks for coming on today. I hope folks really start to utilize some of the resources, especially your YouTube videos out there, when having hard conversations and encouraging other men to get involved. Men, we need you in the pro-life movement. I want to say that and be emphatically clear that we need more men in the pro-life movement. And I don't need just more men because we need more manual laborers. We need your voice in the pro-life movement. So join us. Thank you all for coming on today. Thank you for tuning in. Make sure you share this episode, especially with pro-life men in your life who might need a boost, especially with all of the mainstream media's rhetoric right now about how this women's rights issue, even though they don't know what a woman is, and how men shouldn't be talking about this. So make sure you share this episode. Make sure you subscribe. Bye, everyone.